yeah, this happened, right? It did. And here's how we've improved to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Here are the things that you should think about. Here's the actor that you should think about, right? Here's what you should be considering from a threat actor perspective.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as other top CISOs and industry security leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Tim Brown, CISO at Solarwinds.
I've been in technology for many years, too many to mention, really. When we were growing up, I did a lot with identity, right? That was kind of the initial kind of route that we had back then. You'll remember, right, when we had 30 flavors of Unix, and we had VAXs, and we had mainframes, and we had all this stuff that was just so inconsistent. And security was sort of an afterthought. It was something that we had to do in regulated environments, but not so much for businesses. That shifted over the years, right? It started with some identity stuff. Then I went to Symantec, and literally we ended up selling my products over to outsourcing our products out to another company. And then I joined the CTO office, and I was heading architecture and strategy for Symantec. And there it's all security, right? Back then it was how do we make sure 60 million desktops of the world were protected, right? How do we make sure we stay ahead of the game? How do we innovate? So absolutely, the changing landscape of security was always exciting. It wasn't the same old job every day. It was, constantly changing, constantly a challenge, constantly new innovation and information. And, I've always said the threat landscape is evolving, and it evolves all the time. I keep saying that because it just is. So I think really the challenges, that's one of the things that I always love, right? And I'm always passionate about, kind of how we meet those challenges, and, how we try to stay ahead of the adversaries. How do we stay ahead in technology? How do we, continue to move the needle forward? So just that kind of excites me.
So you're one of those CISOs that it's interesting that we come from different places. There's CISOs that come out of the compliance or the GRC area, and there's operational CISOs, and we've had this discussion about CISOs coming out of the business, and so you've seen this evolution in different areas. But you were really grounded in the technology.
Yeah. I'm grounded in engineering, and one of my jobs, so I was CTO for the CA's security unit. I was CTO for Dell Software's security unit. So I've been working with CISOs for many years and telling them what I thought that they needed to do. But I really wanted to have the operational background. Right. And gaining the operational background meant I had to do the job myself. Right. I had to be, in their shoes to be able to, help them. Right. I had to be able to know more. And some things that I learned were easier. Right. Some things were harder. Right. It definitely was kind of an eye opener to go from more of the engineering product development world to a CISO world. And I still wanted my fingers in development, still wanted my fingers in strategy, still wanted to be able to be affecting engineering. But I wanted a dual role, and that's the role that I ended up taking, is really more of a, not just a straight CISO, but a CISO plus, having enough influence on what we build.
Sure. So speaking of experiences, you've been a busy guy the last few years with clearly with the Solarwinds breach, and so for those of our listeners that haven't heard of the Solarwinds breach, I don't know who those people would be or where they were.
Even my mom heard of the Solarwinds breach. Yeah,
I don't know where they are, but if you could just kind of walk us through like a timeline and what happened with the Solarwinds.
Yeah, absolutely. So December 12th, 2020 is when we were notified by Mandiant. FireEye Mandiant, Kevin Mandiant called our CEO and essentially said that you had shipped tainted code, right? And pretty simple that way. And then I got on the call with, Charles Carmichael, who's the CTO for Mandiant, and he went through details with me and said, "Okay, this is what we saw." Right, we saw this, and they had done a great job of analyzing the code that they saw because since we are C#, you can decompile that code and you can get to a pretty good readable form of code. So they had done a lot of diagnostics to say, hey, this is what the code does. So that's what's kicked off everything, is saying, okay, well, what happened? This was on a Saturday. So Saturday, we started our incident response process. This is in the middle of COVID. We're getting everybody on cell phones. We're trying to talk to everybody, and we mobilized essentially the team, right? Is this true? Did it really happen? Okay, what versions are it in? It turned out that, in 2 days, we published our statement to the stock exchange, essentially. It said that 3 builds were affected. We knew that because we were able to do the same model, right? With the decompiled code, we were able to decompile code in all of our versions and say, wait a second, here's where it is, right? It's in 3 versions that were produced between March and June. We knew that. We gave a very high estimate of the number of potentially affected customers. Anybody that was downloaded is kind of, we took the highest number possible, right? If you had downloaded it, we counted you.
Was that the 18,000?
Yeah, that's where the 18,000 number came up. So in order for the code as written to be able to be effective, it had to go to what we called stage 2, which means it had to connect to a command and control server, resolve from AVSM cloud, connect to a command and control server, and then start doing action. Many customers were configured in a way that was not possible, right? They said, you whitelist update.solarwinds.com, and that was it. And then you wouldn't be able to go to stage 2. So again, we knew this after the fact, right? So the actual affected or stage 2 customers was under 100, right? And kind of well under 100, but under 100 is a safe big number. But we went to the big number simply because that's what downloaded. So that started the process. We brought in help, brought CrowdStrike in to do an investigation, started for really a threat hunt, and KPMG Forensics. CrowdStrike, fantastic threat hunt team, but not necessarily skilled from the development place. They didn't know build system. They didn't know Team City. They didn't know those things. So we brought in extra help from KPMG Forensics team. Further on, we brought in help from the Krebs Stamos group. So Chris Krebs and Alex Stamos came in and helped in different ways. CISO very involved as a very good partner and really working towards amplifying the truth. So it happened, right? We shipped code. We shipped tainted code in those 3 versions, affected many people. Just the investigation affected the world, and we never forget that, right? Although, our Christmas was kind of ruined, right? When we look at the world actually was investigating, do we have SolarWinds in our environment? What versions are we running? Are we affected? So the effect was pretty dynamic.
Because I think a lot of companies didn't know, after that came out, were they infected? Were there backdoors in their environment?
Right. And what went on. So that's why it was so important to be able to match with CISA's guidance. And we matched very closely, right? It took a little while to, convince them that here are the versions that were affected, here are the versions that weren't, to document it in the right way. But once we had that, you'll see that our web pages mimic CISA's web pages, mimic their guidance. And by working well together with them, we really had what I consider the best possible response we could have had, right? That said, here are the instructions. If you went to stage 2, do this. If you're running an affected build, do this. If you're, running an affected build and you haven't gone to stage 2, do this. So that helped a lot in the response.
Was there confusion in the beginning of that response?
Oh yeah. So absolutely, the version numbers that we used were hard to understand. So like 2019.4 came out before 2020.2 or whatever the number was, right? So it was, well, I'm running a higher version. Is that still affected than this version? So version numbers were one thing. We found that we sent email out to every one of our customers, right? But the emails that we had were for our sales contacts. They weren't necessarily security contacts. So something we've changed since then is now we add a security contact to our customer record. So now I can communicate security, concerns, security issues, new releases from a security perspective to that list. And it's a list we'll never market to or anything like that. So that helped. Just the story itself takes a life of its own, right? And, press will fill vacuums when they don't get answers. And,
there was some things in the press about that it was being attributed to an intern that had a SolarWinds.
And that had nothing to do with, so again, right, press is looking around for everybody to talk to that will talk to them. And somebody responsibly disclosed to us that a password was put on a public repo by mistake. Somebody scans the public repo, finds, a password sitting there, password 123, and they reported it responsibly to us, right? Mistakes happen. It happened to be an intern that published that. It had nothing to do with the breach, had nothing to do with, anything. It was, an FTP site, but the password was there, right? So they responsibly disclosed like 6 months before this occurred, and we fixed it. We audited the system, did all the right things around it. But when, press came out, they took advantage to say, hey, this happened. And then press grabbed onto that and essentially said, oh, this is indicative of their security program, right? Mm-hmm. Then other quotes in press were simply, SolarWinds current employees were not talking. So SolarWinds former employees would get quoted. And, people that had been with, before that I even got there. So I've been there for 5 years. So those people got quoted. So that type of information absolutely is there. And you have to, one of the things that I absolutely say from a lessons learned is you have to grow a hard shell during this, right? Not everybody's going to say nice things about Tim during this cycle, right? There's plenty of bad information about me out there. And you just have to, if we tried to fight every single misinformation in press, we wouldn't have been able to focus on our customer. Our most important thing was the customer.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. I know somebody that was tracking the number of SolarWinds articles that were out there, and you got up to somewhere around 3,000, I think, at last count that I saw. And so, how does a CISO react to that? Because they're getting asked by their boards and their companies, what's going on with the SolarWinds breach? Are we impacted?
Right.
How did they get to the truth in that?
Yeah. So a couple of things, right? So much press, so much information. Nobody even knew what we do, right? So remember, we're a network management tool that's utilized by IT pros, right? Primarily systems management, network management. It sits in the bowels of your network guys. So the IT guys know about it, right? But when you look at a board, it's like, do we use the SolarWinds stuff, right? Why are we using the SolarWinds stuff, right? Is it power and energy? What's here? So what then they're asking is their CISOs, are we using it? What those CISOs need to be able to articulate is why and what. Our general customers loved our products and still do, right? And that's how you start with, right? That our customers love the product before the incident. They still love the product. It's providing an essential, it's an essential tool to run their businesses. So if we were not that essential, we wouldn't still have, this is public information, right? So, Q2 results were, I think, for the quarter, we're back into the 90s from a renewal rate. We're overall in the high 80s. So people still love our products and want to use them. Now, what a big part of what we had to do was arm those customers, those direct customers, with enough information of why. Why should I stay with SolarWinds? What are they doing? How are they going forward? How are they making sure that, it can't happen again? How are they, putting resilience into their environment? How are they sharing what they have with the industry? How are they making the industry better? So we wanted our customers and our direct customers to be able to answer that to their board, answer that to their CISO, answer that to their exec team, so that they understood, SolarWinds went through this, therefore they're stronger than others. They're stronger than the competitor. The risk associated with changing is greater than the risk associated with staying with them because of X, Y, and Z. And that's the way that we approached it, right? We approached, as much transparency as possible, as much transparency of what happened, and much transparency about the threat actor. We shared the source code to Sunspot and Sunburst when we found it. We had, interviews with, many different people. We invited our research team to participate. We invited our, I said we have DLA Piper running kind of quarterback from a legal perspective. We had CrowdStrike present. So we really got out in front of it and talked and said, yeah, this happened, right? It did. And here's how we've improved to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Here are the things that you should think about. Here's the actor that you should think about, right? Here's what you should be considering from a threat actor perspective.
What are some of those things that you've done since then?
Oh, yeah. So really taking the assume breach process in everything. So not only did we have, the threat hunt partners and the forensics team inside of our midst looking for things, right? Saying, okay, well, this person has too much privilege. Is this person an insider? What were they performing? So just tightening down infrastructure. In IT area, we implemented multi-tiered MFA. So we not only have conditional access, we have YubiKeys for all administrators, and most of the developers are still working through a few there. But we also then, just tightened down, every ingress point that we had inside the environment, centralized it, took away some of the flexibility from the development environment, because we have always operated 3 environments: a dev environment, a lab environment, and a production or corporate environment. Corporate, very controlled. That's where our SOX audits does. That's where everything else is done. Lab, a playground, because it's not connected to anything, and all fence. And dev, somewhere in between. Dev is now maturing to be at the same level of corp. Then we look at build processes and how, since this happened in build, again, the threat actor didn't go after our source control system because they know they would get caught. Where they inserted their code was in a transient virtual machine that is part of the build process. So Orion is 12 products when it's built. It takes a long time. So Team City is our orchestrator, right? And as Team City works, it says, oh, compile this set of stuff, compile this set of stuff, compile this set of stuff. So we spin up virtual machines to do that. What they did is insert into that virtual machine to say, hey, if this is building, replace it with this. And that was sunspot code listening. Sunburst code was what they replaced it with or augmented it with. And then we went through, built it, signed it, and shipped it. So one of the things that we focused on is build environments. How do we make sure our build matches our source? That was kind of step one of build environment improvement, two-way build. So we go from source code to the build process to product. We then install the product, decompile the product, and link it back to source. So that was kind of stage one, and that was way back at the end of January. Stage two was take and recreate a build environment inside of AWS with everything being in code. So now the code that does the build is checked in. So everything is now ephemeral, it gets built every time, and it is built via code, and it's in an environment where very, very few have access to be able to modify that code that does build. Third step is a triple build. So this is one that we've open sourced and kind of showing to everybody. And a couple of things in it, ephemeral, like what we talked about, but deterministic, mean that if you build with the same source code twice, you'll be able to compare, do a binary compare against them. And that's usually not possible because of time. So if you take a set of files, you build them once, you take a set of files, you build them again, time gets in the way, and those are no longer binary compatible. So we had to figure out how to make them binary compatible. Reason why is the third aspect is multiple build pipelines. So a test or verification pipeline, a security pipeline, and developer pipeline. No one person having access to all three. So if you're going to affect our build again, you would have to get collusion between multiple people to affect the build, right? Because we build them, we then do compares of them. If they don't match, we don't ship. So we still do the two-way thing, but we also do the triple build. So that gives us a lot of assurity that nothing has happened in that build process.
What would you recommend to organizations that are looking now at their own build processes and wondering, could this happen to us? How can they protect themselves, or is there a good way to detect these things from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some of the stuff like two-way builds, right? There's some of the stuff like doing multiple builds with different people having access to it. It's really putting resilience into the model. We're using reversing labs as well as a tool to help there, but that's not the only way that we've done a surety of this. So really looking at saying, what is my weakest link? And if I have a single point of failure, how are you going to eliminate that single point of failure? So we always had peer reviews, but we added architectural reviews as well to the check-in process for code. So think about saying, okay, if Tim Brown gets compromised, what's going to happen? How is this going to affect the system? And can we put systems in place that make sure that this, takes more than, one entry point to affect the builds? A lot of good work being done here by Microsoft, by Google, by AWS in this same area. A lot of our initial work was based on Salsa, which is a Google framework. So we published some of this out inside of white papers, and some of the pieces are getting open sourced as well. But that's one of the things, right? It's just, the threat actor for us was very thoughtful, very, very patient. Very directive on what they did. They didn't come in and be noisy. The code that they wrote was, interesting. It was novel, right? Having it wait for 14 days before it started up, makes it, having it blacklist us and not run inside of Solarwinds domain. So I wouldn't say difficult, but I would say that very thoughtful of what they did, right? It wasn't like they were making noise and going around the outside and just, being loud, right? Figured out what they could do, did a test run in October, came back later, right? And then left, right, in June. So that's the threat actor type we're going to deal with more and more in the future. right? So that's what we have to prepare for from both a ransomware as well as nation state type attacks.
Do you think it would have been possible to detect it earlier on in the cycle, or back those several months back? Or
yeah, I mean, everything is possible, right? 18,000 folks got this software, at least had access to it. So many customers did install it, right? And we didn't see signs of it until the Mandiant guys saw signs of it and called it out. So it was, again, written to be stealthy. It was written to be quiet. It was written to evade. So that's one. Internally, could we have done better, right? Absolutely, right? It happened. So we didn't do enough to protect everything. One of the things that I invested in from my team was more visibility, right? So had a very good program before, right? I was spending a little above industry average. Now I'm spending much more than industry average because in order to get out of this type of event, you really want to be exemplary, right? So build process is one thing from an exemplary perspective. I run 3 SOCs now because I want visibility. So I have CrowdStrike SOC for workstation servers. I have that then goes to SecureWorks SOC, and SecureWorks adds in firewalls, AWS, Azure, all the applications. And my SOC is tertiary to that. So, and then we have, low and threat hunting on the outside of it. So things, as opposed to running my own SOC, which was reasonable, right? I get a lot more visibility. I had a part-time red team. Now I have a full-time red team. I had, internal audit was another one that I added to my team so that I can really audit every step from, code creation all the way to product, and have it from an audit perspective, because we expect to see more requirements coming from the audit community for more explicit model definition, more explicit proof of how you're going through each one of these steps. So we're preempting that and doing that ourselves.
Sure. Well, this has been very informative, Tim, and I appreciate the efforts that you're doing to enhance the security and being transparent about sharing that information out as well. Any last advice that you'd like to leave with CISOs, current, emerging, or experienced CISOs that are working?
Yeah, one of the things is that, one of the things that people ask is, why didn't I get fired, right? And it's a very common question. And when you look historically, right, I'm one of the few that didn't, right? And a lot of that was because of, background that I had in the past, right? You need to be more than a background CISO. You need to be able to be out in front of people. You need to be able to talk to the nations of the world. You need to be able to talk to the largest companies of the world. You need to be able to, take ownership, articulate kind of what you know now and what you know later. And in order to do that, you have to have that skill set. So I was lucky enough to be in a position of having that type of skill set prior to the incident, and it came into play during this. So I think from CISO's perspective, it's very important that they prepare for this, right? That they prepare for, being able to communicate broadly, being able to, take ownership for things. I also had a very good, a good exec team, a very good board that was very supportive during this. So establish those relationships with those teams. Don't wait for the incident to occur. I think those things will kind of help, CISOs in general grow, right? And be prepared to be able to take on, small events that are, important, and, larger events if they occur. So I think that's a very important lesson for, CISOs to, take away.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very well said, and I couldn't agree with you more. So thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time to share your insights, to help others as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Visit more CISO Stories podcasts on securityweekly.com, where you will find an index to prior episodes. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.